Hi, my name is Jara. I teach people how to garden and grow food. It is the middle of February and I am harvesting probably the last few batches of my pea crops because believe it or not, here in Florida, it's already starting to get way too hot here in February and pea crops really do not like the heat. Peas are one of those crops that I feel are well worth growing at home because the flavor and texture is by far more superior than anything you can buy in the grocery store. As soon as the peas are harvested, the sugar content starts converting into carbs. So by the time you buy those peas from the grocery store, you have lost a lot of that sweet flavor. I'm serious, these are so sweet, they taste like garden candy. They don't make it into my house. I am snacking on all of these peas while I'm walking around or working in my garden. Plus, peas are an easy crop to grow. I highly recommend them for beginner gardeners. They barely have any issues with pests or diseases. Peas are also a fast growing crop. They are typically ready to harvest anywhere between 60 to 70 days from seed. So today I'm going to show you how to grow peas from seed all the way to harvest. And just so you know, there is a copy of this video growing guide in written form on my website, jarasgarden.com. There's a blog section called Gardening Info and Guides. Some people prefer to have things written down so that they can save it on their computer or share it with other people, so you can find this guide there. So you've decided to grow peas in your garden and you're seed shopping and you've noticed there's tons of different varieties to choose from. In general, there are three major categories for peas. So first up, we have snow peas. So these are the types of peas that you commonly see in Asian cuisine like stir fries. They are best harvested and eaten when they are flat like this before the peas inside the pod start to swell. And if you harvest them at the right time, they are stringless and they're not fibrous or anything like that. They are super sweet. This is a pea variety for shelling specifically. So you don't eat the pods, what you want are the peas inside. You can harvest shelling peas at two different stages. If you want fresh green peas, then you're gonna harvest it while the pods are still green. And the peas inside, let me open up this one. These peas are really big in here. Look at those peas. So these are grown for the peas, for sweet peas. Or you can let the entire pod dry out and you can remove the peas from inside and store them away to use later. These peas are so sweet. And the last variety are the snap peas. So this is actually a hybrid between the snow pea and shelling peas. With snap peas, the entire thing is edible. You want to harvest the pods when they have just started swelling up with the peas, but before the pods kind of dry out or get tough. And then you eat the whole thing. Other differences between the cultivars of peas are color. Standard color is green, but sometimes you can find varieties that are purple podded or even yellow podded. And quite honestly, there's no real difference between the flavor. I do feel like the purple pods are a little less sweeter than the yellow or the green. Some people don't like all the sweetness of the regular green pods and they actually enjoy the purple ones more. I personally really like to grow the other colors, the yellow and the purple, just because they're easier to spot on the vine at harvest time. If you're in need of some pea seeds or want to grow the same varieties that I do right here in my own garden, you can find seeds on my website. A definite requirement for growing peas is that they need something to climb on. These are vining plants. They absolutely need something to grow up. With that said, there are some cultivars that are dwarf varieties, so their vines get around 5 feet tall, but the standard varieties get anywhere between 7 to 8 feet tall. So if you're going to grow peas, be prepared to have a nice trellis for them to grow on. I know my plants are starting to look a little crispy here, but it is the middle of February and it's getting way too hot for them here in Florida. So this is what happens. They start drying up and a lot of their leaves start turning brown. That's how I know that it's the end of my pea season. Since it's really hot to begin with, especially in my garden here in Florida, I like to grow them in a spot that gets 6 hours of morning sunlight, but then afternoon shade. Peas also do best in soil that is heavy with organic material. I'm here in Florida, we have native sandy soil and they will grow okay in sandy soil, but you really got to make sure that you are consistent with the watering and fertilizing if you're growing in the sandy soil, because if they run out of water and dry out, they get dry and crispy like this. I have my peas growing up a heavy duty trellis, but they can also be grown in pots or containers. If you're going to go that route, then make sure you select a cultivar that is dwarf. That means it gets about 5 feet tall. And actually a lot of people like to build a little teepee right on top of that pot or container, usually made out of like bamboo sticks or even a large tomato cage. My favorite kind of structure for growing the peas is using 2 T-posts. I do have some 10-foot and 7-foot T-posts, which are even better. These right here, I believe, are 6-foot tall T-posts. And I like to put a PVC tee on top of each T-post So that way I can run a 3/4 inch electrical conduit pipe straight through those tees all the way across. And then I find this vinyl mesh trellis from Amazon. This is really heavy duty. It lasts me years. So I just weave it like a curtain right across that electrical conduit pipe. This type of trellis is really easy to build. It doesn't require any tools except for a T-post driver, which makes it much easier to drive these posts into the ground. And at the end of the growing season, I can easily take the whole thing apart and move it somewhere else. This particular variety of pea is one that hits 8 foot tall. So as you can see, it's already going past this trellis. So next time I grow this particular variety, I'm going to grow it on the T-posts that are around 10 feet tall. To be successful growing peas, you really need to make sure that you're growing them at the right time of the year. You will need to know your last spring frost date, and if you're not sure what that is, you can go to a website called plantmaps.com. You put in your zip code and it will give you a lot of really good and important gardening information like your USDA hardiness zone and your average first and last frost dates. If you're in zones 1 through 7, you're going to start sowing your seeds 6 weeks before your last spring frost date. Peas can withstand light frost and a little bit of snow. If you're in zones 8 and up where you have a mild winter like me here in Florida, growing peas can be kind of challenging. We have a very short window of cool temperatures to properly grow peas. They need about 4 months in a row of nice cool temperatures to grow from seed all the way to harvest. Therefore, for zones 8 and up, you're going to grow peas during fall, winter, and spring. If you try to grow them when it's too hot, they're not going to be happy. They're just going to get real crispy and be stunted in growth. So for the warmer zones, what you're looking for is the first month in fall where your max average high temperature finally falls below 80 degrees. You can find that by, again, using the website plantmaps.com. When you put in your zip code at the very bottom, it will show a chart of every single month and it will show the average high and the average low temperatures for that month. For me here in Orlando, Florida, zone 9B, the very first month where the temperatures finally fall below 80 degrees Fahrenheit is November. So I start direct sowing all of my seeds in November and I usually start harvesting by January. December is the last month for me to hurry up and direct sow some seeds if I want to get a crop before it starts getting too hot again. So let me show you 2 ways to sow the seeds. To direct sow seeds, it's very, very easy. You're just going to move any mulch out of the way if that's what you have. I have tons of wood chips in my garden beds. And then you're just going to make like a straight line trench. As you can see, this soil is really rich in organic matter. I've been composting here with wood chips and everything else I can find, cardboard, compost, everything, and it's just really, really good soil. You're going to sow the seeds about 1 inch deep. I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of fertilizer just to give the seedlings a head start, but this is completely optional. Here's what the seeds look like, and I follow square foot gardening planting guidelines in general, and I say in general because I add some more. So basically square foot gardening says 9 seeds per 1 square foot, but I do a trench here and I just start sprinkling the seeds. You can really densely plant these. They don't really compete with each other or have issues that way like other crops. So they can be planted very densely and not have any real issues. And then you're just going to push some of that dirt over and pack down so the seeds make good contact with the soil. Make sure that you keep this area nice and moist so that the seedlings will germinate. It usually takes anywhere between 5 to 10 days for germination. Direct sowing seeds for peas is by far the easiest way to grow them, but there are some scenarios where you might have to actually start them in pots or containers, or my preference, these 72 cell seed trays. For example, you might have critters that like to dig out your pea seeds and eat them up, or maybe your soil is still too cold or wet and they won't germinate properly. I also have the same issue when it comes to direct sowing seeds for beans and corn. So contrary to popular belief, I actually start them all in 72 cell seed trays because I get near perfect germination. So to begin, I filled up my 72 cell seed trays with seed starting mix. And by the way, if you struggle with sowing seeds and growing your own transplants at home, I do have a YouTube video all about perfecting the seed sowing skills so that you get awesome germination and save a lot of money not having to buy those transplants. I just take a stick, this is just a stick from my garden, and poke a hole in the middle. Again, you're going to want about a 1 inch deep hole because that's how deep we're going to sow these seeds. I normally get really good germination when I do this, so I'm only going to put 1 seed per cell. So the reason why a lot of people recommend that you direct sow only, peas, beans, and corn is because they don't like to have their root systems disturbed. It'll actually cause transplant shock. But I find that when I use these 72 cell seed trays, you're basically growing a plant plug, so to speak. And as you can see, the entire root system is all together really nicely. I just pop these out and put them in the ground, and I don't have any issues with transplant shock because I'm not messing up the root system. So in about 3 weeks time, these seedlings will be ready to be transplanted. You don't want to wait any more beyond that point, because then they start getting root bound in these little cells here, and that is bad because then that's going to cause issues or growth issues once you do plant it into the garden. If you're going to do this method, just make sure you plant them out at the 3-week mark. Make sure you keep this nice and moist so that they germinate properly. Usually it takes about 5 to 10 days again for germination. So I have a lesser known fact about growing snow peas that not a lot of people know about, but before I get into that, if you're enjoying this video and you're learning something new, make sure you subscribe to my channel. That way you get notified of every time I post new videos. Your support is greatly appreciated and it motivates me to create more videos just like this one. So my extra tip is the pea shoots, which are the new growth points on the vine, are delicious. They taste just like peas. They're very tender. I learned about this because my best friend is from Hong Kong and they do a lot of Chinese style hot pot. So she kind of showed me the way with hot pot, and they put pea shoots in their soups. So ever since I tried it, I was in love. Trust me guys, they are delicious. I dare you to give them a try. Pea shoots are really good when they're cooked in soups, stir fries, or even eaten raw in salads. Personally, I like them raw in salads. They taste just like peas. The only thing is you want to make sure that you are picking the first top 2 to 3 inches of growth on new growth specifically, because that is what is most tender. If you get like old stems, they'll be woody and crunchy. They're not that great. All you have to do is pinch it off, and I like to pinch it right above a leaf node because that's where the plant will continue branching off new growth. So there it is, fresh pea shoots. I'm gonna eat it right now. That's great. It tastes just like the snow peas, but in leaf and stem form. Now it is mid-February. These plants have been growing here since November and they're on their way out. They're looking crispy and yellow and all sorts of things. I do sell seeds on my website, so I'm letting all of this go to seed. That's why they don't look too great, but my primary focus right now is just harvesting seed. So if you're gonna eat the pea shoots, it's better to do that when these are new, like seedlings, usually around the 1 month mark. These have been here for like 3 months, and that way you'll get the most tender, soft, juicy pea shoots. Once your seeds have germinated and they've started growing, you're gonna have to care for them. Peas do require a decent amount of water. They don't like being dried out. If they dry out, you'll notice that all their leaves get crispy and brown. So they like a consistent amount of water, not too much water, because then that will cause root rot. Here in Florida, we're growing peas during fall, winter, and spring, which is also our dry season. So again, just make sure you monitor the watering and the dryness of the soil. So I always like to do a soil test with my finger. I like to push my finger into the soil, and if it is dry to my second knuckle, then I know it's time to water. Or sometimes we get some heat waves. Like, yeah, we'll get a couple cold fronts during the winter time, but then the temperatures go right back up to the 80s. And if you notice that they're wilting or kind of struggling, check the water, make sure they're getting enough. Besides causing the leaves to get all brown and crinkled up, if they're not getting enough water, it also makes the pods really tough and stringy and just not good. When it comes to fertilizing peas, you actually don't need to fertilize them. The only time that I fertilize them is initially when I am either direct sowing the seeds in the trench like I talked about earlier, or if I am popping in my little plugs as a transplant, I'll sprinkle in some fertilizer in the transplant hole. But that's it. You really don't want to overdo it on fertilizing when it comes to peas and beans, because if they get too much nitrogen, they're going to focus a lot of their energy on leafy green growth instead of producing peas. And actually peas, just like beans, pull nitrogen from the air and they affix it into the soil. So it's really good to companion plant leafy greens around the base of your peas, such as lettuce. You also don't need to prune your pea plants at all. They'll just grow and ramble. However, if they reach the very top of your trellis, like mine right here is already reaching the top, you can pinch off the tops, and that will kind of force the energy back down through the plant to branch off more and keep growing that way instead of growing taller. Now, the awesome thing about growing peas is that they're not susceptible to many pests or diseases. I mean, I'm growing them here during the wintertime in Florida, where our pest and disease pressure is just down normally anyways. The only pest issue I would say to look out for is aphids, because aphids like to suck juices out of plants. And the tender new green growth of peas are very succulent. So you might notice aphids kind of congregating on the new leafy growth. If that happens, try just squirting them off with some water. If you continue to have an issue with it, you can try so many different kind of aphid treatments. Normally though, if you have an aphid problem, it's actually an ant problem, because ants like to eat the sweet secretions that the aphids give off. So they'll actually farm the aphids on your plants and protect them from predators. So whenever I have an aphid problem, the first thing I do is set up some ant traps around the garden. Another option is to plant trap crops for aphids. My personal favorite is nasturtiums, so I have those all over my garden. But another idea for you is actually kale. And yes, I grow kale to eat it, but I always make sure I plant way more kale than what I need, because it actually attracts a lot of aphids, so they'll go bother like my kale crops and leave all the rest of my crops alone. It is also said that aphids don't like strong smelling things, so you can try sprays with neem oil, peppermint, or rosemary essential oils. As far as diseases, the most common thing you're probably going to see is powdery mildew. Especially here in Florida, our mornings tend to be like very full of dew, so like all the plants are covered in like a thin layer of moisture, and it usually dissipates throughout the day. But that definitely causes powdery mildew to kind of proliferate through my garden. But that's very easy to fix. My personal favorite treatment for powdery mildew and any leaf disease, really anything, blight, spots, whatever, is 1 cup of hydrogen peroxide per 1 gallon of water. Hopefully everything's growing great in your garden and you get to the point where you're ready for harvest. Harvesting is going to depend on what variety of pea you're growing. This is a shelling pea, so I've allowed the pods to get really, really thick and let the peas inside swell. So this one is ready, and I want to harvest my peas for fresh peas. I don't want them to like dry out for storage. I mean, you can totally do that. If you're going to go that route, then allow the entire shell or pod to dry out and then harvest the dry seeds inside. But I really like them fresh and green, so this is perfect right here. It's all swollen up, and right before the pod gets like textured and dried out. So then I'm just going to split these open and harvest out the peas. If you're growing snow peas, you're going to want to harvest the pods before the peas inside start to swell. If you wait too long, they'll form a string, and that's not great for eating, or the pods will get really tough. Here's an example right here of a pod that is still nice and flat. These are the purple potted snow peas, and I don't know if you guys could see that well on the camera, but how much they really stand out due to their color, so it just makes harvesting a lot easier. But peas and beans, the more that you harvest, the better, because if the plant senses that it's going to seed, or you've allowed the pod to sit on the plant so long that it's starting to go to seed, then it thinks its life cycle is over, it's done, it doesn't need to produce anymore. So stay on top of harvesting if you want to get more production out of your plants. And these purple ones are really delicious too. They tend to not be as sweet as like the yellow or the green, but still really delicious. I like to come through and harvest my peas a couple times a week. You really have to stay on top of it. I prefer to eat them fresh. I don't like to freeze them or anything like that. I just wash them and then allow them to dry 100% before I put them in bags with like a piece of a paper towel just to absorb extra moisture, and they'll keep in the fridge for about 2 weeks. You can also parboil or blanch your peas and preserve them in the freezer, or you can try fermenting or canning as a way to preserve them. Well, I hope you liked this video and learned a lot, so that way you'll be successful growing beautiful peas in your own home garden. If you have any questions, or maybe you have some additional tips or tricks for me, please comment below. I learned just as much from you guys as you do from me. Just so you know, I post daily gardening tips and tricks on my TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. So make sure you're following me somewhere if you want to learn more about gardening. Thank you so much for watching. Happy gardening.